Hello, Susanna Lobez here, actor turned barrister turned broadcaster turned true crime writer, and proud member of Sisters in Crime Australia. Welcome to the Scarlet Stiletto Bites podcast. For over 30 years now, Sisters in Crime Australia has supported our women crime writers, both true crime and fiction, and some criminal literary talent has been unearthed. Among many awards, there's an annual prize for short crime fiction, the Scarlet Stiletto Awards. And for those of you who prefer your stories by ear, in 2023 we commenced this podcast series, Scarlet Stiletto Bites, to celebrate the Sisters' 30th anniversary. Each story is short, but not always sweet. Expect twisted tales, quirky humour, and a frisson of feminism. Please support us by following, sharing, reviewing, and generally spreading the word. We have no paywall. Politics can be a rather smutty game. Yes, that's with an M, not an L. But when does the smut become crime? Today's story explores this. Smoke by Aoife Clifford, who won the runner-up and the funniest story awards at the Scarlet Stilettos in 2009. Having a career in the Australian Labor Party is a bit like the phases of the moon. Mostly you're either waxing or waning. You also have to be a lunatic, but that's neither here nor there. Just starting my job, I was in my new moon phase. Roland Stainless Gasink was at full moon. He was a legend in party circles. Vaughan Arnold, on the other hand, was more like a supernova. But then he had never really fitted the party mould. He had arrived, shone brightly, and then spectacularly self-combusted, leaving a black hole in his wake. I was on maternity leave with my 6-month-old baby when I received a phone call from Jim McCafferty, partner at the criminal law firm where I worked. A mate of his needed a hand with some research. Just a week or so, was I interested? Yes, I was. Maternity leave was not what I had expected, and I was going stir-crazy. I loved my daughter, but I was missing the adult world. Tom was able to take unpaid parental leave from his accountancy firm, and they say that the global financial crisis has no upside. The only inkling I had about what would be involved was when Jim asked me if I was still a member. Jim was old school Labor. He lived by the motto, never plead guilty, never vote Liberal. Probably sounds better in Latin. I answered in the affirmative. I had been signed up at university by an ambitious young hack named Duncan Keller for some elaborate branch-stacking manoeuvre I could never work out. Call me sentimental, I had continued to pay for my own membership. Jim gave me a name and an address in West Melbourne, and I fronted up the next day. Tom was at home holding the baby and a long list of instructions, and I had left teary, clutching photos of her, in case I forgot what she looked like. By the time I'd caught the tram into the city, I had put the photos back in their little folder, and by the time I had walked to West Melbourne, I had put the folder in my handbag and was feeling more sanguine. I was back in the real world, and it was good. The address was a 3-story building of concrete and Venetian blinds. The sign on the door said, True Skills, Industry Standards Board. Inside, I was directed upstairs by a bored receptionist who looked like she hadn't cracked a smile since Malcolm Fraser lost his trousers. The second-floor offices, painted in various shades of post-mortem grey, were as quiet as the proverbial. Only one door was open. I peered through it to see a tufty-haired man in his 50s dressed in a cardigan, open-necked shirt and slacks, sitting with his feet up on the desk, reading the form guide. I knocked. "Roland Gazink, I'm Callan Valiant." He looked up and examined me closely. He was paunchy. Thick square glasses and overly large teeth dominated his jowly face. "You're late. Come on, we got a funeral to attend." He got up, swapped the cardigan for a sports jacket of unprepossessing houndstooth and walked past me. Not knowing what else to do, I followed. The recruitment of Vaughan Arnold as a star Labor candidate had been one of those ideas that sounded great at the time. Broady boy made good, married wealthy, and became richer, helicoptered into a safe seat upon discovering his true vocation. He aspired to greatness. That is, if greatness includes being premier of the place to be. Arnold quickly acquired the name Vegas, i.e. all sparkle and not much substance. It didn't take long for the glitter to wear off. The current Premier snookered Arnold by appointing him police minister. Underworld killings and police corruption were bad enough, but the latest imbroglio was the current pay negotiations, which had started to escalate into industrial action and more damaging headlines. Can you blame a guy for heading for the white light when all he can see in the mirror is a flashing blue one? There was a veritable who's who of the Labor and police worlds standing around in front of the church. Gazink started shooting the breeze with a ginger moustache attached to a toothpick of a man. I walked around the back of the church to ring home and see how Tom was coping. But before I got the chance, I ran into the ubiquitous Duncan Keller, who had graduated from his Monash University fiefdom to be the Premier's advisor, as he wasted no time in telling me. "What are you doing here?" he asked distractedly. Duncan was one of those people who always looks over your shoulder to make sure he's not missing out on talking to anyone more important, which, in my case, was just about everyone else here. "I'm working with Roland Gazink," I answered. Duncan's eyes swiveled back to me. "You're here with Roland Stainless Gazink?" he asked incredulously. "Yeah," I answered, trying to work out what that nickname meant. "Oh my God! You're a smoke jumper!" Duncan was hyperventilating. Is that the new term for policy wonk?" I asked, slightly puzzled. Duncan recovered some of his savoir-faire as he correctly assessed the situation. "You have no idea who Stainless is, do you?" Duncan already knew from our Monash days that I was a political ingenue. I shook my head. "Well, you know dirt units." I nodded. I was naive, but I wasn't a moron. Dirt units are like mosquitoes. You know they exist by seeing the result of what they do, rather than seeing them do it. Contrary to public perception, most of a dirt unit's activity is directed within the party. The only thing worse than having your enemies succeed is having your friends. Duncan's own grubby fingerprints had been all over several at uni. Usually informal and temporary, they engage in the types of pranks your average 10-year-old would think childish. Roland Gazink is like the opposite of a dirt unit. He's the guy everyone goes to when things go to shit. He's the one person all the factions trust. It's like he's Switzerland, neutral ground. So when it's agreed by the 5 families that there is something that is in everyone's interest to fix, he's the guy that does it. He jumps the smoke and puts out the fire. He diffuses the bomb. When everyone else is running away at 1,000,000 miles an hour, he's the guy going in. He is the Man of Steel. Well, it was like hearing that Superman was a paid-up member. And I thought he was some old duffer that the party had put out to pasture. Oh, why him? I asked. He's unique. He has no personal ambition and puts the party's interests above his own. He gets the job done. But why you? If I had not been so flabbergasted, I might have been insulted at the derisive tone. Duncan was off and running. And why is he here? I mean, Arnold dying isn't that bad for the government. Sensitivity and empathy aren't highly valued in a political operative. In fact, it's good, he continued. The boss was always worried Vegas was plotting a coup. Duncan looked around and saw the Premier heading into church. Gotta go, Cal. Must catch up. Call you. I couldn't spot Gesink, so I headed inside as the funeral was about to begin. From where I was sitting, I had a sideways view of Arnold's wife. I'd pictured a trophy waif, crying just enough to need to obviously dab her eyes, but not enough for the makeup to run. Instead, she was solid, with a weather-beaten face framed by a helmet of slate-coloured hair. She could have been carved from stone. Amongst the politicians, with faces switched to sincere, mouthing platitudes and crying crocodile tears, she stood out. She was real. A wave of sympathy welled up. I went all misty-eyed. Oh, Jesus, I hate hormones. After the funeral, I was looking for Gesink when Ginger Moustache tapped me on the shoulder. Stainless had to go to the races at Flemington. He said take the rest of the day off and meet him at 10 a.m. tomorrow. He handed me a note with a Toorak address on it. I walked away and rang home, and that did not lighten my mood, as Tom was doing great without me. I decided I deserved a treat and went to the movies. The next day I found my way across the Yarra. Toorak is blue ribbon Liberal territory. It was also where Vaughan Arnold had lived, in the massive mansion in front of me. Gesink was waiting for me. Have we got an appointment? I asked. Not quite, Gesink replied. Paying our respects. Well, I did that yesterday at the funeral, I said pointedly. He ignored me and pressed the buzzer in the front gate. A butler ushered us into a studio the size of my inner city terrace. As I had never actually seen a butler in the flesh before, I suppose I could be excused for staring. As far as I could tell, he buttled well, establishing that we did not have an appointment, informing us that his mistress was not at home, but he would attempt to contact her on our behalf while we waited. All in a slightly supercilious tone, but with nary a raised eyebrow, suggesting we were nothing special. He left us to contemplate our commonness. Gesink began to look around the study. What do we do now, ransack the joint? I asked sarcastically. Gesink gave me a pained look. You can learn a lot about a person by just being in their environment. I still did not know what exactly we wanted to learn about Arnold, so I just took in the scenery. All I could tell you was that money might not grow on trees, but it can certainly buy you a few. The room was wood-panelled, wood-floored, with wooden furniture. It could have doubled as a sauna, except for the tasteful pictures of sailing boats that dotted the walls. I sat down on the Chesterfield lounge, one of the few things that was not wooden, while Gesink looked at the display cabinet. He seemed rather taken with the trophy in there. The Chesterfield was about as comfortable as it looked, but only because I realised I was sitting on something metal that had half fallen down the back of the cushion. I pulled it out. It was a keyring. Just then I heard a slight cough as the butler returned. "I have spoken with Madam. She appreciates your support and requests that you leave your details with me so that she can schedule an appointment with you at a convenient time." So this was how they said clear off and don't come back in Tory speak. Casink tried to strike up a conversation with him about the Jane Tate Memorial Cup he'd been looking at, but Jeeves did not have an opinion on that, so we left. Outside the house, I decided to get down to tin tacks. Look, what are we doing? What am I supposed to be doing? There's a dead politician, a butler for God's sake, and I looked down at my hand. I was still holding the keyring. What the hell am I doing with this? Casink grabbed it from me and looked at it carefully. At the end of the chain there was a large silver oval with a fleur-de-lis engraved on it. "Ah, now we're getting somewhere," he said. "Vaughan was a Boy Scout?" Casink snorted with derision. We got into his car. He turned and looked at me. "This is a membership badge to Fleur-de-Lis. Ever heard of it?" "Only the one by Beethoven," I answered. Casink rolled his eyes. "It's the most exclusive brothel in town. Membership only. Just like the Melbourne Club, only women are allowed in this one. Now what I'm about to tell you goes no further than these 4 walls." He looked around and changed it to "these 4 doors. If it comes into the public domain, I will know it was you, and I will hunt you down myself. Comprende?" Yeah, you catch and kill your own. I get it. The nearest I had got to the painters and dockers was watching Underbelly, but I knew how to make wisecracks with the best of them. Casink scrutinised me closely. "All right then, you will need to have a look at these." He handed me a photo folder. At first I wasn't sure what I was seeing. By the time I worked it out, the smartass in me got up and left. I nearly fainted. Casink continued. "It appears that the late police minister was what is known in the trade as a gasper." Once again I was learning new words. However, this time I could join the dots myself, even if they were swimming before my eyes. I thought it was only Tory MPs who got up to this kind of behaviour. I took a deep breath. And maybe rock stars and the odd actor. Casink just sat there shaking his head. "I thought he died of a heart attack," I said faintly. Technically that's so. Luckily for us, we found a very literal doctor." I wondered what a not-so-literal doctor would have written. Death involving a lot of rope with just a hint of latex? Now, was this an unfortunate accident involving autoerotic asphyxia, or was it murder? That really shocked me. Well, isn't that a question for the police? Well, yes, they are looking at it as well, but there's an unofficial go slow on it. Why? Well, it's a carrot. Fix the pay negotiations and any investigation will be done discreetly. Don't cave in, and by next week every eligible voter in Melbourne will be able to identify Arnold by his privates. They will have seen these pictures so often. Still, it gives us a head start in trying to get to the bottom of this." I looked blankly at him. He sighed and saw that he would have to spell it out. "If it's murder, there is a chance it's work-related. If it's work-related, chances are the killer's a fellow comrade. Wants his seat, wants his cabinet position, whatever. We want to find out first and put daylight between the incident and the party. You can only spin something well if you know what happened in the first place, and finding that out is our job." I slouched back into my seat. For a minute I felt like getting out of the car, slamming the door, and never having to look at Kasinka again. But then I remembered that it was this or a return to maternity leave. So I pulled myself together, which I immediately demonstrated by knocking over my handbag. Personal belongings went flying all over the back seat. I hastily stuffed everything back into it and handed Kasink happy snaps back to him. "All right, so what do we do now?" "I think you need to find out what you can at Fleur de Lis," Kasink answered. "A woman will get more out of the girls. I happen to be acquainted with the manager on a purely professional basis, of course." He coloured slightly. "I'll make you an appointment for tonight." About 6 p.m. I made my way to an alley just off Spring Street. Tom had been all sweetness and light when I phoned saying I was going to be home late. He promised to keep dinner warm for me, the perfect homemaker. Damn it. I felt ridiculous knocking on the very discreet door to which Kasink had directed me, as suits milled about on their way home from the office. It was opened by an enormous man who radiated danger like uranium. Without a word, he ushered me inside and locked the door. I followed him up a set of fire stairs into a bar. It was nice, if you like bordello red, with dashes of gilt-edged erotic art. Surprisingly, I did. A middle-aged woman whose outfit had more elements than the periodic table was sitting waiting for me. "Well, you're on time." She grimaced like a crocodile in shoulder pads and gold buttons. "You tell Stainless from me that we're square now. Dead men don't tell tales, and neither do successful entrepreneurs." She gave me a hard stare. "I must look as if I have 3LO as a nickname." "Discretion is my middle name," I assured her, which could sort of work with valiant. "Melissa was Vaughan's regular service provider. She's waiting for you in the lounge." Melissa was sitting at a table in the next room. Having been programmed to think hookers are either drugged-out skanks or supermodel escorts, I was surprised to see she looked more like your average hairdresser. She was well-groomed, made up and trim, but looking a little tired. "I don't quite know where to begin." She smiled. "How about I start? My specialty is listening," she said. "I get the blokes who want a sympathetic ear, those who aren't sure if what they're doing is right, or who want to bitch about their wife, their kids, their boss. Most of the other girls can't be bothered with their whinging. I don't mind it. I find people interesting, and I'm cheaper than a shrink, with a few extra tricks up my sleeve. So sure, I had sex occasionally with Vaughan, but mostly he talked and I listened." "How often did you see him?" "Every couple of weeks, more often when Parliament was sitting." "And when was the last time you saw him?" "Well, he came in the night he died. He had just handed the Premier his resignation. He was heading off to the US the next day." "He resigned?" I asked, amazed. "He said he was tired of waiting around for a party that didn't know talent when it saw it, and he was off to start some joint venture in Silicon Valley where he was going to make billions. So he was cutting all ties and going to sail off into the sunset." "Was he into bondage at all?" She did not blink an eyelid. "Yeah, sometimes. That's not me, though. That's Vanessa, and she's not in until 8 o'clock. She yawned and apologised. "Oh, sorry, I didn't get much sleep today. One of my kids was home from school." "How many kids have you got?" I asked. 3. "Oh, this winter's been a bugger with colds and flu. How about you?" Just one. She's 6 months. I only went back to work this week. You coping? No tears in the bathroom? Phone calls to childcare? Oh, it's been okay. My partner's at home with her and they're going great. Well, he sounds like a catch. He was a good guy, I thought to myself. Last night I'd come home to a beautiful dinner, a clean house and a happy baby. I was lucky. He was a better mother than I was. I nodded at Melissa. She smiled again. Got any photos with you? I love babies. Clearly this was why she earned the big bucks. No one had ever shown so much interest in me. I pulled out the photo pocket, gave it to her and sat waiting to hear how gorgeous my girl was. She looked slightly puzzled, flicked through the bunch and then, twisting her head, examined one photo again. I don't know if I'd be framing any of these. I glanced over and grimaced. They were the ones of Arnold. I must have handed the wrong ones back to Gasink in the car. Oh, I don't know if you're supposed to have seen these, I said nervously. She shrugged her shoulders. Nothing I haven't seen before, and that's including the corpse. She studied them all carefully. One in particular she looked at very closely. Anything wrong? I asked. Meaning anything other than the dead man with a rope around his neck and latex knot covering all the bits you really don't want to see. See this knot here? She pointed to the one around his neck. That's standard, a hangman's knot. But this one binding his hands isn't. I was never a girl guide. It just looked like a knot to me. In situations like this, the usual knot we use is the grief knot. It's a trick knot. Looks like a real one, but it isn't hard to get out of if things start to go wrong. Isn't that not playing by the bondage rules, using knots just for show? Melissa laughed. He was a politician. It's all for show. She looked at it again. No, the one he's got there is unusual. I've only ever seen sailors use that one. What were you in a former life? A magician's assistant? No, first job was at a brothel in Port Melbourne. What's the old saying? Screw sailors, listen to a whole bunch of crap stories. So he wouldn't have got out of that one. Not just that. He couldn't have tied that one himself. Someone else did. It was beginning to sound less like an accidental death and more like murder. Melissa looked at me. You look like you need a drink. I nodded. I don't think I'm cut out for this kind of work. Well, you don't want to get a drink from here. It costs a small fortune. You head home to your fella and babe. I got up to go. Can I give you just one piece of advice? She said. Sure, I answered. The amount of guys who turn up in a brothel for the first time because their wives haven't got time for sex because of the kids, you wouldn't believe. So make sure you keep the flame burning. Got me? I nodded and left. The next day I was in at West Melbourne early. I told it all to Kasink. He twitched at the wrong photos part, but said nothing. When I finished, he went into his office and shut the door. It sounded like he was making phone calls. To amuse myself, I thought of Melissa's advice and tried to remember the last time things had hotted up at home, and I couldn't. I suspected that wasn't such a good sign. After half an hour, Kasink came out of the office. We traded photos. Turns out you were right. He did resign the night he died. Premier didn't want it to be public knowledge in case it looked bad for his government. He gave me a broad smile. That's good news? I asked. It's better than hearing the Premier killed his police minister. Was that likely? I scoffed. Clearly you don't know the Premier that well. Come on, we've got somewhere else to be now. Kasink drove us down past the docks and the refinery into Williamstown. Willie was where Labor politicians can live in good conscience in million-dollar homes, but still be keeping it real in the western suburbs. We headed down to the shoreline where the waves were choppy and the breeze stiff. A dozen or so yachts were moored there. Gasink walked along until he came to a particularly fine one with the name Soa painted on the side. A woman was looking at us from the deck. "Hello," Gasink called out. "We've come for a chat." It was Arnold's wife. She glared at us but climbed down from the boat. "Your indentured help told me you were here," Gasink said. "I saw a photo of the boat on the wall of your study the other day." "What do you want?" Without even hesitating, Gasink asked. "To know why you murdered Vaughan." My jaw dropped with surprise. Arnold's wife was equally startled. She dissolved as if the stone solidity had been a mirage. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Doesn't matter," Gasink replied. "Why'd you do it?" "Well, he came home that night and said he was leaving me. I'd just been the start-up money and he was off to the States. He said he was selling up everything, the house, everything, and starting again. But it was when he said he was going to take the boat. He'd taken a liking to it, wanted to sail off into the sunset. And that was just to punish me. It wasn't his to take. It's like my baby. But he said he was going the next day, and any problems I had with it, I could talk to his lawyers." She melted away into sobs. "So you," Gasink prompted. "I told him I wanted to part on good terms, be civilised and discuss it over dinner. He's such a pompous idiot, he believed me. I put a sedative in the wine, and when he was unconscious, I set him up so he strangled himself. He had all the gear in our house. I made it look like it was an accident, but ensured that he'd be found out for the dirty perv he was. If I had known the party was going to cover it up, I wouldn't have bothered with all the bondage gear. I would have strangled him with my bare hands." She was turning to granite again, angry and unrepentant. "What happens now?" she asked. "Are you going to tell the police?" Gasink shook his head. They might work it out for themselves, but it won't come from me." Without a word, she turned away and climbed back on the boat. We walked off. Gasink managed to find the one greasy spoon among all the totted-up cafes and ordered a couple of coffees. I was speechless with cold and also the turn of events. He took pity on me and began talking. It started with the trophy I saw in the cabinet of that study. The Jane Tate Memorial Cup is awarded to the first boat across the line, skippered by a woman, each year in the Sydney to Hobart. I looked it up. She had won it 3 years running on that boat. That's serious sailing. So once you found out about the sailor's knot and that it was unlikely he was a serious political threat anymore, all roads led home. I thought confronting her was worth a shot. "But how did you know she would tell you the truth?" Gasink smirked. Rich types aren't used to upstarts asking impertinent questions. They expect to be kowtowed to. Confront them head on and they'll fold quicker than an American private equity firm. I sat there beginning to thaw. But shouldn't we go to the police? She did murder him. It's not my job. I'm here to protect the party. It might be peopled by shysters, crooks, hacks and numbskulls, but it is bigger than all of them. It's bigger than you and me, and it's certainly bigger than Vegas. It's striving for something better. The greater happiness to the mass of the people, as Chiff said. I'm not going to let it be blindsided by the death of a political runt like Arnold. I ruminated on that for a while. Gasink finished his coffee and then, while looking studiously out of the window, said, "You did good. You know when to ask questions and when to keep your mouth shut. Interested in sticking around a bit longer?" I looked at him in surprise. "Oh, I'll think about it." We sat there and watched the rain start. I opened the door to the smell of a dinner cooking. "Tom, I'm home." But to my surprise, it was my mother who called back, "Shh, you'll wake up the baby." I walked down the hall into our minuscule kitchen. "What are you doing here?" I asked, astonished. My mother lived over an hour's drive away, and visits were planned well in advance, as were exits. "When I heard you were abandoning poor Tom with the baby, I offered to help. I've come each day this week, cooked dinner, cleaned up, let him have some time to himself." It all made sense. "Where's Tom now?" I asked through gritted teeth. "Oh, he's out having a run at the moment. I'm glad you're back, as I'll get home before peak hour. Dinner will be ready in about half an hour," she said, and kissed me goodbye. Two can play that game. I picked up the phone and rang a zinc. "I'll take the job," I said. "Good," he said. "See you tomorrow." I was officially a smoke jumper. Tom came in just after I had opened the bottle of wine and stirred the curry. "Sprung," I said, raising my glass to him. He looked guilty. Well, she offered to help, and I thought, well, why not? "And all week I've been feeling a failure because you were coping at home much better than I had been. Dinners cooked, house cleaned, baby happy, and all without a word of complaint. You are a fraud." "Actually, I do enjoy being at home," he admitted sheepishly. He put his arms around me. That's lucky, I thought, but still some softening up was in order. "Now, the baby is asleep and dinner won't be ready for at least 15 minutes. I raised an eyebrow coquettishly. "I got a few tips from a sex worker yesterday." 15 minutes? I'll only need 5. Tom was salivating. "Then remind me to tell you about something over dinner." The end. Thanks so much for listening. We'd love to get your feedback and we'd love to reach more listeners. Our website is sistersincrime.org.au and our email address is admin@sistersincrime.org.au. Until next Friday then, when we bring you another scintillating story from Australian women crime creative.